Okay, let's dive in. So I'm Jeremy Greenbaum. I'm from the Wix marketing team. Welcome to our live Q&A for the webinar, Discover the Wix Studio Editor. If you haven't had a chance to watch that webinar, you can find it along with tons more info and learning resources at our Academy library, which we will paste in the chat for you at the end of the webinar. We're super excited to introduce you to the world of Wix Studio, the web creation platform built for agencies and freelancers, where you can deliver exceptional, high-quality sites in the most efficient way. The platform was designed with you in mind, covering the many layers of creating and managing multiple projects while maintaining quality. In a few moments, you'll meet our Wix Studio expert, the incredible Sebi Vidret, who is a product marketing manager on the Wix Studio team. Your little wave, Sebi. There we go. There's a few things I just want to run through before jumping in. As I said, for any questions, you're going to want to use that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Also, if you haven't already, please join our Wix Studio forum. We've got UX people, designers, product managers, and they're actively answering questions with lots of lively creation discussions and information sharing. So we'll also paste that link at the end of the webinar for you as well. Lastly, this session is being recorded, so it'll be sent to you soon for you to watch back and recap if you need. So no worries if things get like, whoa, that's a little too fast. Like, you can always watch back later. So enough talking for me. Let's welcome our Wix Studio expert, Sebi.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and to take the opportunity to answer your questions. So again, like Jeremy was saying, we wanted to have a live Q&A for those of you that got a chance to watch the webinar offline. Maybe you watched the recording on YouTube or the Academy, and you might have some questions about it. So let's do maybe a short recap of what happened in the webinar, just so everyone kind of refreshes their mind. And then we'll start with the Q&A. And you guys, I see we're already starting to get some questions, so it's great. So feel free to continue to add questions, even ask for elaborations of whatever I'm talking about as well. Okay, so during the webinar, we built this really great website, thecaymannoodle.com. By the way, it's a live website. You can actually go to this domain and you can actually see it. So if you're interested to check it out on your own computer, feel free to go to this website. Now, during this webinar, we actually recreated this whole website. And the interesting thing about this website is most of it's scaling down. And this is like one of the big value propositions of the Wix Studio is this ability to scale down your entire website without having to do any of the guesswork of logic of, responsive design and thinking about what's the unit in this. We just basically put, things to scale pretty quickly, and we'll touch up on it in a second. We also built this section from scratch. We built a grid as well. And in the grid, we also, when we got down all the way down to mobile, let's go all the way down to mobile. We used AI to relay out our mobile design. So interesting new technology available. We also have this scroll interaction. So if you have questions about interactions, it's a great moment to ask about it. We also have some other interactions here where this text is, kind of like a ticker, I guess, is a good term to use, but it's sort of moving in a loop. So with this out of the way, let's go ahead and go into the editor real quick. Again, this is just a short recap. We're not going to really build it, but just so everyone sort of remembers everything, because I know that it's, a lot of things happen throughout a week. So just want to make sure everyone's on the same same mindset. So in this specific section, we can see here we have the responsive behavior scale proportionally, and all the other elements are also scaling proportionally. So this makes everything just scale down all the way from desktop to tablet. Eventually, let's just go to tablet. 1 second, here's tablet, and then all the way down to mobile. Now, you can recognize that we have a few changes between desktop, tablet, and mobile as well. They all have their own sort of unique changes. And as we mentioned in the webinar, whenever you're designing on desktop, any changes you make are cascading down to the smaller breakpoints. So it's going from desktop to tablet to mobile. But then between these breakpoints, you can go ahead and say, you know what, I want this tablet to have a bit of a different size. I want this, maybe I want to hide this image. So I can right click on this image and select to hide it. Now it's hidden on tablet, but on desktop, it's not affected because any changes I make will cascade down to the smaller breakpoint. You can see we don't have the image here either. And this is because we can do overrides. This is the term that we use is called overrides. You have the desktop design, then you make overrides on this design, and any sort of design changes, coloration, sizes, things like this, we can always make these changes. So most of the website scaling down, we're using Section Grid here, which is a really powerful tool. Actually, I don't know if you caught the end of the webinar, but I actually added the CSS grid, which if we have a question about it, we can talk about it, about what's the difference between the two grids. Actually, just because I just opened the can of worms, let's just talk about what's the difference. So in this case, you can see that this specific grid has a lot of different rows and columns. If I click on this plus here, I'm going to add a new section from scratch. I can basically create this section into a grid, and I can go to this grid and I have a cell on the right. Let's just recreate what we have on the bottom. And I can click here, and then I can click here on the top. I can divide it in half again. So we're just basically grabbing these cells and dividing them. By the way, if you're not really too familiar with grids in general, the concept of a grid actually comes from CSS, if you're familiar with CSS grids. But basically, the whole idea here is that we're grabbing one area and we're just dividing it into separate areas. So here we have one area, here we have another area, and then we have two little smaller areas. In general, because it's a grid, it's made up of rows and columns. So that's why when we click here, we see rows, and then we have columns here. But why do these two sort of look different? Well, we have what's called the section grid, and then we have what's called the CSS grid. Section grid is a lot easier to edit, to move around elements, and just to kind of, set up the section. And, for the most part, this is all you're going to need for many, many, many designs. But sometimes you need a little bit more control, because you can see here, I don't get the option of having full control over the size of this specific column on the grid. So if I go to this grid cell, grid column, I can click on this and we have an option. We have a lot more control. I can click here and I have all the different units, whether I want it to scale, pixels, VH, VW, min content, max content, calculation, min max. Now, if all of this is new to you, it's a good time to ask about it. And then we can go ahead and elaborate a bit more. So I think I spoke too much. So I think it's a good time to actually take real questions from the crowd. So Jeremy, if you want, go ahead.
I'll jump in with the first one. So what's your process before starting to build a website?
Oh, that's a really great question. So before I start to build a website, I do like to at least know, have some sort of prototype or sketch on a paper, or maybe it's on another design platform, or just in general, trying to have something, something to follow, some sort of guidelines. Because, you don't want to take too much time trying to figure out what is the right tool to use and all these other things. But however, in Wix Studio, it's very simple to just build a responsive design, right? Most of these elements in this section, everything was just thrown into place, set it to scale, and then it just scales down. So I think just in general, there isn't a lot of preparation needed to start building your design. It's all a matter of preference. Do you prefer to start with the design that you have already? You're following these guidelines on the design, or maybe you just want to use the Wix Studio as your means of designing the website and also building at the same time. So you actually end up saving a lot of time if you're building, testing, and checking to make sure things work. So yes.
Great.
The next one, your question.
Yes. I hope it did. It sounded like a thorough answer, so I think we're good. But let us know if not. What are some key tips or best practices from the live webinar?
Okay, so I think there's a lot of tips. I've been editing on Studio for some time now, and the Editor X as well from before. So I do have a lot of tips in general. I think one of the most important things is check your design as you're going. Don't just think about designing on here and then later I'll do mobile someday at some point. Because sometimes it's important to be checking things as you're going along, because decisions you make on desktop will affect mobile. And then maybe you realize on a mobile your design doesn't work well. You need to make a drastic change of this, and now you need to go back to desktop and change it again. And it's like opening again the desktop. I rather build a small part. Maybe you can say this part here, build it, resize, see how it looks like if I grab this and resize the canvas like this, and see what it looks like on desktop. And then if we go to tablet, see what this looks like as well on tablet, right? Tablet's a bit smaller, the ranges. And then if we go to mobile, you can also see as well. I really recommend you always try to go to the smallest point of the breakpoint, because that's typically when a lot of issues can come up in terms of design, is on the smallest point, because it's so small that maybe the text becomes too small or becomes too big for the section, and it might have some issues there. So yes, other tips in general is to try to do maybe the interactions last. Try to do the interactions and other stuff last. Try to build the design and try to see how it feels and looks, and get the most out of the way. Get that out of the way before you start diving into all the effects and the life that you want to give to the website.
Yeah, that's a great tip, to kind of get the scaffolding across the board in all different sizes, exactly, kind of set, and then go in with the details. Great. The next one is, what do you recommend for editing size?
That's actually a really great question. Now if for those of you that might not recall about the editing size is right here. Editing size is really, really, really important when it comes down to building a website on Wix Studio. Just about a lot of the times and different responsive behaviors rely on what's your so-and-so editing size. For example, if I click on this video here, you can see that I have the width here, W 640 pixels with a little asterisk. This means pixel on canvas. This means it's 640 pixels, which is about half of this. So right now we're getting about half of the size. Everything that has this asterisk is using the editing size to make the calculation. We don't want you to have to think about the different units and have to make calculations in your head. We just want to stick to a single unit and try to make it a lot easier for you to edit. Now, this number right here is dependent on here. So if I go here and I change, let's just say we make this 1001 pixels. You can see now the width also came down, because again, it's relative to our editing size. Also, editing size is the size that you can, when you resize and let go, it will jump back into place. So what is, going back to the questions, what's recommended? In general, the 12,080, I think it's a really good size, because it's like not too large for desktop, and it's also not too small. So it's a good size to start off with. I do like to edit at 1001, which is what we have here right now. And this is just going back to what I was elaborating on earlier, that it's always important to check the smallest point of the breakpoint. And I think if you're editing in this way, you're setting it to scale, you always know that this is the tightest it's going to look. And then when you scale up, then you'll see the changes in how it scales. And in general, I think this looks a little bit harder, not so, in general, you want to always check the tightest point of the breakpoint, because then you get a feel of whether or not your design is working on this point. So it's just important to keep that in mind. But again, you can always be changing. Like I showed earlier, I have here, it changes the width automatically. So I don't need to, worry about changing again, because it will change automatically all the units across the website as we're doing it.
Great answer. Can we add multiple interactions to the same element? And what else can be done with them?
So interactions, we went over a few interactions, but we didn't really dive in depth. There's a lot of really great power and, abilities with interactions that we didn't talk about during the webinar. One of the interactions we created was the interaction where when we're scrolling the page, let's just scroll down here. 1 second, it's going to take a second to load. When we're scrolling the page, the image is sort of revealing itself. Now, as you can see, when I'm over this image, I have all these options of adding additional interactions to them. So I can go ahead and just add a hover interaction. Maybe I can click on here, add hover interaction. And basically, actually, because it has a scroll interaction, you can't do hover interaction. You can't do the click, or there is in general, you can do it only when there is hover and click interactions. You can layer multiple interactions on top of it. So for example, here, let's just say if I have a hover interaction over here, so I am adding it to this item, I can go, let's just maybe make it grow. We're just playing around with it. It's not meant to be exact for the design. So now I have it set to grow. And then I can even select to add a click interaction, where if I click on this, it will shrink maybe. Let's see how it works. We're doing this, this is a live Q&A, so I'm not sure how it's going to look. So let's try to see what happens. You can see it grows, and then when I click, it shrinks down. So you kind of see a kind of you can layer multiple different interactions on top of things. Also, you can have, can actually have a different trigger. So for example, if I hover over this element, maybe I can make another element trigger. So for example, if I go here on hover, I want to animate, let's do this one. Just an example again. So on hover, I want to animate another item and I want it to move. So we'll make it move. So let's try to see what happens now. So now there's like multiple things can happen. I don't think it's going to look super great, but you kind of will get the idea. You can see how hovering over one item makes something else move. So you can kind of get the idea of like having one element trigger an animation on another element. You can layer multiple interactions together, different types of interactions. So yes. Cool.
Yeah, that's a super cool kind of feature. I don't know if I'd use it on that, but I think there's a lot of different applications you could do to make your website really pop and stand out.
100%, yes.
Next question. What is the CSS grid and what's better about it compared to the other super grid?
So this ties back to my side note earlier, where basically the super grid, or we can call it the section grid in this case, it's this other grid where basically everything, let's just add a container here just so it's easier to track. Everything's just a little bit easier to edit. I can click on this cell and click on this cell. 1 second, let's just click on 2 cells and then select to swap. You can see how it automatically swaps the cells together. There's a lot of easier, things that are a lot easier to manage. In general, for those of you that do know the CSS grid and just to understand the context of what is a section grid, if we go to the section grid here, let's just go here, for example, we can change layouts as well. We can change from rows to columns to cards and different things, add cells very easily, to the left, to the right, whatever you want to do. But one of the cool things about it is that you can always switch back to this or switch to the CSS grid. So you can start off if you're used to using the CSS grid and need that extra control, because in this grid, we're using, you don't have a lot of control over the specific size of each cell. You can see that the width and the height are disabled, and they're set to, to scale down and to have, it's a different, you don't have a lot of options in terms of like how the grid will behave. But if you go and you change this to a CSS grid by clicking here, let's just not show this again, switch to CSS grid. You can see now we have full control over each individual each individual row and column. And actually you can see what the units we're actually using. So we're using FR, which is a fraction unit. Just like in math, you have a fraction. So for example, here I have one fraction, another fraction, and then two half fractions in the middle. So the half fraction is half of one fraction. So it's in general in grids, it's like the most commonly used unit because it's easy math. And it's also very useful, but you have full control here of using any other unit type that you want to use to build the design that you want in general.
Great. Next question. What's the difference between pinned and sticky?
This is a really great question. So pinned, for those of you familiar with CSS or maybe just in general, it's a very commonly used term in web design. It's actually what we might refer to as fixed. So you can see here the header here is set to pinned, which means that when we scroll down, it will scroll down with the page. It will continue to scroll down all the way down. Now, what is sticky? Sticky actually only makes something stick inside of the container and scroll with the page, but until the point that it gets to the bottom of the container. So for example, we have this image here. Right now, when I scroll, this image does not scroll. But if I want to go ahead and say, I want to make this sticky, then I have, if I go ahead and go to preview, and scroll down, you can see it scrolls down, but when it gets to the bottom of its parent or, its parent container or the section, it will stop scrolling. So it's a bit of a different behavior here. There's also a few other things as well, because you can also set, what's called like the offset. So you can offset it and say, I don't want it to, maybe you can say by 20 pixels, I can have the offset. And this means that when it scrolls down, it's a bit actually, maybe I should add, 1 second. I'm just going to change something here. When it scrolls down with the page, it's not scrolling with me. Oh, because I'm doing it backwards. I didn't realize I did it from the bottom. Sorry, I meant to do it from the top. It's just that design-wise, it's better. But you will see that when we're moving, it has a bit of a buffer of 20 pixels, just like margins. Maybe this is what you would expect from margins.
Great. Yeah, lots of cool ways of making your site super unique and really creative. I'm loving all these questions. What are some of the collaboration features for working with a team?
Oh, this is a really great. This is a great question, and actually, I'm gonna duplicate my tab here because I want to show one of the best collaboration features, which is concurrent editing, which means that I could be editing the website at the same time as another person, and you can actually see them on the canvas, and just like as you would expect, you would be able to communicate with them and make sure you don't override each other's changes. And you can even edit the same element at the same time. I don't recommend it because you might override each other's changes, but you can even do that. But for example, if I just open the editor, it's going to take a second here, but you can see here that it has, remember I was just clicking on this image. So now it's telling me that, because I have two instances of myself, you can see that it's I'm here. So you can have multiple people editing at the same time, and it will update accordingly. For example, if we go back here and resize it here, let's just make it very small, and I go back, it will take a second to save, and you can see now it updated as well here. So this is one of the best collaboration features available, because now you can have your whole team, collaborators, even clients on the site at the same time. Also, in other really cool features is we have actually comments. you can click on this here on the bottom left and add a comment to an element, and you can say, please make it larger. And you can even tag someone else. So you can just go ahead here and maybe tag myself here, Sebi, and then make sure that Sebi knows that he needs to go ahead and make it larger. And you can even reply, and it's really cool to be able to collaborate on the website, have notes and comments and tasks just from one panel. And yes, and also very, very powerful roles and permissions. You can have full control over specific parts of the website, whether you only want someone to edit only the content, only the data, whether you want someone to have access to a specific page. You can go and restrict their access to specific pages as well. So it's a lot of different tools you can use to make to give yourself the workspace and the environment that you need to collaborate with your team.
All right, I think that's probably the amount of questions we have time for today. I wanted to just do a couple closing remarks before we say goodbye. All right, so as I said before, this session was recorded, so you're going to have access to it in the next few days. If you have any questions that were not able to be answered, just feel free to join the new Wix Studio forum and the Studio Discord community. Feel free to ask away. Our product managers will be more than happy to help you out with any questions you have. And of course, our Academy is always there as a resource for you to get more information. Also, if you have any feedback, please let us know in the feedback form, which we will paste in the chat now. And we'll also paste the link to our library, to our Academy library. You've been a really great crowd. We hope to see you again in lots of our future webinars. So thank you so much, everyone. This has been really informative. Thank you, Sebi, for all of your knowledge. And bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks, everyone, for your time. Good luck.